The Mirror Wants Your Face. A Hood Eloquence original. There is no love so consuming as the love that wants to consume you entirely. Part 1. The Private Server. Chapter 1. The ad nobody else could see. The notification arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Wedged between a financial aid reminder Daisa had already resolved and a promotional email from a candle company she'd bought exactly one thing from in 2022 and apparently would never be forgiven for it. She almost scrolled past it. The subject line read, "Comapex tier invite Daquan Industries, discretion required." Daisa Marks sat up straighter in her second-hand reading chair, the one she'd wrestled into her new apartment 3 weeks ago and refused to feel guilty about loving. She was 26 years old. She had a degree in communications, a GPA that had not once dipped below 3.7, a head full of strategy, and for the first time in her adult life, a door that locked from the inside and kept certain people out. Certain people. One person, specifically. She pushed that thought aside and read the email again. Congratulations. Your academic profile has been flagged by Comapex, a private talent network accessible only to students and graduates ranked in the top 4% of accredited communications programs nationally. Daquan Industries, a full-spectrum advertising and media firm based in Atlanta, Georgia, is actively seeking a senior executive assistant to their chief executive. This is not a posted position. This is an invitation. Compensation is commensurate with top-tier talent. An NDA will be required prior to interview. A live-in provision is included in the contract. Please confirm your interest within 48 hours. Daisa read it 3 times. Then she got up, poured herself a glass of water, came back, and read it a 4th. Live-in provision. She skimmed past that part the way you skim past a price tag when you already know you want something. She'd deal with it later. What mattered right now was that Daquan Industries was not a small name. She had studied their campaigns in her senior thesis. DeAndre Daquan had built that firm from a 2-room operation above a barbershop in Vine City to a 40-story presence on Peachtree that other firms measured themselves against and came up short. His work was surgical, cultural, and unapologetically black. The campaigns he put out didn't just sell products, they told stories. Full, breathing, specific stories about people who looked like Daisa and her family and every neighborhood she'd ever grown up in. She had admired the man's mind long before she knew his face. She confirmed her interest at 11:53 p.m. And then, because some habits are older than independence, she checked her phone to see if Sam had called. 2 missed calls. 1 text. The text read, "Saw the light on. You up?" Daisa set the phone face down on the table. Sam didn't live here. Sam didn't know this address. And yet somehow, Sam always seemed to know when the light was on. Chapter 2. The Golden Child and the Light She Blocks. Samantha Marks was 25 years old and had been the most beautiful person in every room she'd ever entered. This was not ego, it was simply the way things had always been arranged, the way the universe had apparently decided to compensate her for every character deficit she'd accumulated over a lifetime. She had their mother's cheekbones and their father's stubbornness and a smile that made people feel like they'd been chosen. She was the kind of woman strangers offered things to without being asked. Men held doors. Women offered compliments. Teachers, professors, managers, neighbors, all of them bent a little in her direction, like flowers toward the sun. The problem, and there was always a problem, was that Sam did not actually want to be the sun. She wanted to be Daisa. Not in the way younger sisters sometimes want to be like their older siblings, that soft imitation born from admiration. This was something else. Something older and tighter and more consuming than admiration. Sam wanted Daisa's specific life. Her specific style. The way Daisa moved through a room like she'd already surveyed it and made peace with every corner. The way she spoke, measured and precise and layered, like every sentence had been through an editing pass before it left her mouth. The way people listened when Daisa talked, not because she was loud but because she was sure. Sam could replicate the surface of it. She'd been doing that for years. The clothes, the cadence, the taste in music and men and food. She copied Daisa's playlists the day after Daisa made them. She bought versions of Daisa's shoes 2 weeks after seeing them on her feet. She'd even once dated a man simply because Daisa had broken up with him, and she wanted to understand what it felt like to hold something Daisa had let go. She told herself it was love. The intense, consuming kind. She told herself Daisa was ungrateful. That she didn't understand how special she was, and therefore needed Sam nearby to remind her. To reflect it back. She told herself a lot of things. What she did not tell herself, what she had never once been willing to examine in the small quiet hours when the performance dropped, was that what she felt was not admiration at all. It was hunger. The bottomless, patient kind. The kind that wears a loving face. She called Daisa's new number again on Wednesday morning. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Sam stood at her window, still in their childhood home, still in the room with the yellow walls she'd always hated, and stared out at the street, and felt the familiar tightening in her chest that happened whenever Daisa put distance between them. She would close it. She always did. She just needed to figure out where Daisa was going this time. Chapter 3: NDA, Negotiables, and the clause she skimmed. The interview was on a Friday. The offices were on the 38th floor of a building that smelled like money in the specific way that money has a smell, clean and cool and faintly pressurized, like the air had been purchased. Daisa wore a structured cream blazer over a deep wine blouse. Her locks were pinned back with exactly enough intention to say she'd made choices this morning. Low heels. One watch. No fussing. She had reviewed Daquan Industries' last 6 major campaigns on the train. She had memorized the organizational chart she'd found in a 2023 profile in Black Enterprise. She had prepared 3 questions that were not soft questions, the kind of questions that showed she understood the industry and expected to be taken seriously inside of it. She was ready. What she was not prepared for was the feeling of walking into DeAndre Daquan's office. He was standing at the window when his assistant, a precise, efficient woman named Katura who moved like she had a meeting in 4 minutes, showed Daisa in. He was tall, early 30s, in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been grieved over. He turned when he heard the door. The look on his face was not the polished professional neutrality she'd expected. It was something slightly more honest than that. Something that recalibrated in real time. "Ms. Marks," he said. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," she said, and sat down before he could gesture to the chair. He noticed. A small thing, but he noticed it and she could see that he had. The interview lasted an hour and 20 minutes. It was supposed to last 45. He asked her about the Meridian campaign, the one she'd written her thesis on. She broke down not just the strategy but the cultural mechanics of it. Why it had worked not just as advertising, but as a kind of permission slip for a specific community to see themselves as aspirational without being asked to erase anything about themselves to get there. DeAndre Daquan was quiet for a moment after she finished. "You want to run campaigns," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to build them," she said. "From the inside. Starting as your assistant gives me access to understand how this firm actually works, not how it presents itself. I learn better from proximity than from distance." Another beat of quiet. "The position has a live-in clause," he said. "It's not standard practice, but I travel extensively, and the demands on the role require someone who can be functionally accessible around the clock. I have a guest suite that's been converted into a full residential apartment, private entrance, private everything. The clause is optional to accept but comes with a significant compensation increase." Daisa thought about her current apartment. Her locked door. The peace she was still getting used to. Then she thought about the commute she was currently making. The rent she was currently paying. The way Sam had driven past her building twice last week, she'd watched from the window, keeping perfectly still. A private residence. A private entrance. A private everything. "I accept the clause," Daisa said. DeAndre Daquan smiled for the first time. It was a specific kind of smile, not charming in the practice sense, but real, like it had arrived without permission and he hadn't bothered to dismiss it. "Katura will walk you through the NDA. Can you start Monday?" She signed everything in a small conference room with windows that looked out over the city she was relearning how to live in. The NDA was thorough. The compensation was Daisa had to read the number twice and remain professionally still in a way that cost her something. On the last page, in clean legal text, was the live-in clause in full. Private apartment, Daquan residence, Buckhead. Utilities included. Access card provided. Primary responsibilities required physical proximity due to the executive travel schedule. Confidentiality extended to the residential arrangement. No third parties to be informed of the specific address without prior written consent from both parties. Daisa signed her name in her clearest handwriting. Outside, on her way to the elevator, she allowed herself one small, private exhale. She had a new address. A new door. And nobody, not one single person on this planet, knew where it was. Part 2, The Keys. Chapter 4, Moving Day. Daisa moved on a Sunday, the way you do things you want to accomplish without interference, quietly, early, before the world has fully committed to being awake. She hired movers through the app. She told no one. Her mother called at 9 a.m. "Baby, Sam says you're moving. Why didn't you say something? We could have helped." Daisa shifted the phone to her other ear and watched one of the movers carry her reading chair down the hallway. "How does Sam know I'm moving?" A pause. The brief, practiced kind. "She mentioned something." "I don't know how she knew." "You know Sam, she always knows things." "Mom. Did you tell her my address?" Another pause. "I didn't think it was a secret, Daisa." "It was. It is." Her mother went quiet in the specific way she did when she'd done something she knew she shouldn't have and was reorganizing the narrative to place herself outside of the blame. "You know how Sam gets when she feels left out." "I know exactly how Sam gets," Daisa said. "That's why I didn't tell her." She hung up gently. She had learned not to slam things. The new address she gave no one. Not her parents. Not her two closest friends, not yet. She would tell them eventually, once she had enough days behind her that the peace felt real and not borrowed. The Daquan residence was a property in Buckhead that occupied the top 2 floors of a restored craftsman-style estate. The main residence was DeAndre's. The apartment below, accessible through a private garden entrance at the side of the property, was hers. It was immaculate. High ceilings. A kitchen that had clearly been renovated by someone who cooked seriously. A bathroom with a soaking tub Daisa already felt personally attached to. She set her reading chair in the corner by the east window and stood in the middle of the floor and breathed. Quiet. Actual, true, unbroken quiet. No footsteps that stopped outside her door. No calls at 11 p.m. asking if she was awake. No knocks from people who already knew the answer because they'd been watching the window. Daisa Marks sat down in her chair and pulled her knees up and let herself feel, for just a moment, what relief actually felt like in a body that had been bracing for years. It felt like setting down something she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Chapter 5, the first week. She started Monday. Keturah spent the first morning walking Daisa through the operational architecture of DeAndre's schedule with the kind of focused efficiency that Daisa immediately respected. The man had 4 active campaigns in various phases, 2 pending pitches, a board meeting in 2 weeks, and a business trip to Chicago scheduled for the following Friday. He goes dark during travel, Keturah said, which Daisa would later understand meant he stopped performing the version of himself the office expected and became something more direct, more real. The first time she walked into his office with his morning brief, he looked up from a campaign mock-up with what appeared to be genuine frustration. "Tell me why this doesn't work," he said, holding it up. She looked at it for 4 seconds. The color story is aspirational, but the copy is apologetic. They're saying the same thing in opposite directions. The image says I've arrived, the text says I'm hoping you'll accept me. You can't do both. DeAndre set the mock-up down slowly. You've been here 4 hours. You asked. A beat. Then, yeah, I did. By Wednesday, she had reorganized his travel file system in a way that made Keturah, who'd been there 4 years, stop in the doorway of the supply room and look at her. He doesn't like people touching his systems, Keturah said. He doesn't like things that don't work, Daisa replied. Keturah tilted her head. Something shifted in her expression. Not hostility, exactly. More like recalibration. Recognition. Fair enough, she said. By Thursday, DeAndre had started leaving post-its on her desk instead of emailing her. She had started leaving replies in the margins. By Friday, it had become a running dialogue, terse, efficient, occasionally funny, conducted entirely in handwriting across cream-colored notepads. At no point during the first week did Daisa think about Sam more than she wanted to. She thought about her anyway. Chapter 6, Sam begins to spiral. The first sign was the flowers. Sam had sent them to Daisa's old apartment building. The new occupants, a couple in their 30s who'd signed a lease 4 days after Daisa left, had called the number on the card and told Sam politely that no one by that name lived there. Sam spent 20 minutes sitting in her car outside the empty storefront across the street from Daisa's old building, staring at the second-floor window. The curtains were different. Of course they were. Someone else had already moved in. Already replaced her. No, not replaced Daisa. Daisa had left. Sam understood displacement, and she understood absence, and she could not decide which one was happening to her. What she knew was that Daisa was somewhere in the city in a place Sam couldn't find, and that was a feeling she did not have a category for. Daisa had always been findable, even when she tried not to be. Sam went home and called their mother. She changed her address and didn't tell anyone, Sam said. Her voice was level. She was good at keeping her voice level. Not even you. She was upset, their mother said. You know how Daisa gets when she feels crowded. I'm her sister. Simple. Clean. Like it explained everything. Because it did. It always had. The rules that applied to other people had never been meant to apply to Sam, and the fact that Daisa kept trying to enforce them was, in Sam's mind, the real problem. Not the following. Not the surveillance that Sam had never named surveillance because she'd never needed to name it. It was care. It was proximity. It was love of the particular, immersive, total variety that Daisa had always been too closed off to appreciate. Sam opened her laptop. She started with Daisa's public profiles, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. She screenshotted the last tagged location. She cross-referenced it against a mapping app and noted the intersection. She thought about who Daisa knew in that part of the city. She thought about who she could get to know. By the time she went to sleep, she had a strategy. It was patient and it was thorough, and it did not feel like anything other than love. The second sign was Brandon. Brandon Cole had dated Daisa for 8 months 2 years ago. He was fine in a predictable way and not particularly bright, but he worked in media and ran in industry circles, and Sam had identified him approximately 7 months into his relationship with Daisa as someone who could be useful. She'd waited until 3 weeks after they broke up. She'd been patient. She was always patient. By the time she'd slept with Brandon the first time, he'd been grateful in the way recently single men often were, soft and loose and easy to read. By the third time, he was confiding things. By the sixth, he felt protective of her, which was the state Sam found most functional in men. Protective men were generous with information. Daisa started somewhere new, she told him one morning, sitting at the edge of his bed in his apartment in Midtown while he made coffee in the kitchen. I'm worried about her. You know how she never tells anyone anything. She always landed on her feet, Brandon said, coming back with 2 mugs. Do you still talk to anyone who would know where she ended up? Brandon looked at her for a second. Something behind his eyes that wasn't quite suspicion but was flirting with it. Then it passed. They usually passed. I can ask around. He handed her the coffee. You really worry about her that much? Sam smiled. The chosen one. The selected one. The smile that made people feel like they'd been let in. She's my sister, she said. Of course I do. Part 3, Trip 1, Chicago. Chapter 7, Friday Flight, Professional Distance. Chicago in October had a specific quality of cold, not bitter yet, but authoritative. The kind that reminded you it had options and was choosing restraint. DeAndre had meetings with a national retail chain looking to rebrand their advertising approach for a demographic they'd spent the last decade alienating. Daisa had prepped the briefing packet on the flight, headphones in, not speaking unless spoken to in that way she had of being present without being intrusive, which DeAndre had already noted privately as one of the more unusual professional traits he'd encountered. Most people in proximity-based roles performed nearness. They talked to fill the air, offered observations unprompted, kept a running commentary of relevance to justify their presence. Daisa did the opposite. She was near when she was needed, invisible when she wasn't, and she never seemed to require management. It was, he'd told himself, simply excellent professional instinct. He told himself this on the flight. He told himself this during the cab ride to the hotel. He kept telling himself things on a loop, which was its own kind of signal he wasn't listening to. They were in separate rooms on the same floor. This was standard. Katura had booked it before Daisa started. She confirmed it was always the practice. The meetings ran long. 3 hours in the afternoon, then a dinner that extended into the evening because the client's VP of marketing had an unfortunate habit of ordering another bottle every time a decision was close to being made. By 10 o'clock, Daisa had the campaign outline drafted on her tablet, a working title, 2 color concepts, and a copy direction memo that she'd sent first thing in the morning. DeAndre had watched her type across the table during the dinner, occasionally glancing over, and twice said something to the client that was clearly an echo of a point she'd made to him in the car that morning. He hadn't attributed it to her. He also hadn't not attributed it. He'd said we're thinking, which was new. Outside the restaurant, waiting for the car, Chicago put its hand in. The temperature had dropped. Daisa pulled her coat closed. DeAndre, without remarking on it, stepped slightly to her left in a way that broke the wind from that direction. Neither of them mentioned it. In the car she looked out the window, and he looked at nothing in particular, and the city moved past them in streaks of amber and white. You didn't say anything at dinner, he said. About the campaign. But I saw you drafting. It wasn't my meeting. It could have been. He paused. I'm not criticizing. I'm saying what you drafted. I want to see it before the morning brief. She looked at him for the first time directly in hours. All right, she said. Back at the hotel, in the lobby, he held the elevator door. She walked in and turned around, and they stood side by side in the small space, and the doors closed and the floor numbers climbed. 12, 13, 14. Neither of them spoke. At 15 the doors opened and they stepped into the corridor and walked to the point where the hallway diverged. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. He turned right. She turned left. 15 feet down the hall, she heard him stop. Daisa. She turned. He was looking at her from the distance between them with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite getting there. Thank you, he said. For today. You were, it helped. She nodded once. Turned back. Kept walking. In her room she stood at the window for a long time and looked at Chicago doing what Chicago did and let herself feel precisely nothing about the way he'd said her name. She was very disciplined about it. Chapter 8, The Morning After and the Kiss. She sent him the draft at 6:14 a.m. At 6:22 a.m. her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number she almost deleted, then recognized as his personal cell. Katura had included it in the emergency contacts sheet. The text said, "This is the campaign." Then a second text, not a draft. The whole thing. Then a third, which arrived after a longer pause. How did you do that in a restaurant? Daisa sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the gray pre-morning and read the 3 texts in sequence and made a decision about how to respond to them. She chose, "See you at breakfast." He was already at the table when she arrived. Already had coffee. Already had her coffee. She'd mentioned the order once, casually, on Tuesday, and he'd held it. She sat across from him. He pushed the cup toward her. She wrapped both hands around it. I want to put your name on it, he said. Not a warm-up. No preamble. DeAndre Daquan was, she had learned in 2 weeks, a man who didn't believe in entering rooms slowly. It's your firm's campaign. It's your concept. The structure, the copy direction, the insight about the demographic. I work for you. That doesn't mean your work is nameless. Daisa looked at him. He looked back. The morning light was specific through the restaurant windows, that flat, Midwestern light that doesn't flatter anything and therefore makes everything look honest. We can discuss it when we're back in Atlanta, she said. That's a yes. That's a we can discuss it. Something shifted in his expression. The professional register dropped by a degree or two, like a thermostat. You do that, he said. Do what? Keep a door open and lock it at the same time. She didn't have an answer for that. Not a deflection, not a reframe. Just the truth of it sitting there between them. She drank her coffee. The meeting that morning went differently than any meeting before it. DeAndre presented the concept and twice, turned to Daisa in the middle of a point and said, she built this, with the kind of directness that made the client VP look between them trying to recalibrate. Daisa answered questions. Real questions, industry questions, the kind that didn't have easy answers, and she answered them with the precision she'd spent 4 years building. By noon they had a signed letter of intent. In the cab to the airport, DeAndre was quieter than usual. She was looking out the window. He was looking at the space between looking at her and looking at anything else. At the departure gate he said her name again. Just her name. She turned. He kissed her. It was not long. It was not complicated. It was simply a thing that happened at the gate of a Chicago airport in October, his hand briefly at her jaw, her breath going somewhere quiet for just a moment. When he pulled back his expression was the most unguarded she'd seen it. Uncertain in a way she hadn't expected from him. I shouldn't have, he started. Don't apologize, she said. Her voice was steady. She was very good at steady. They boarded the plane. They sat in adjacent seats. She opened her tablet, and he opened his laptop, and they flew home to Atlanta in a silence that was doing several things at once. She did not tell him it hadn't been enough. She did not tell herself either, though it took more work. Chapter 9, Sam makes a move. Brandon had come through. He hadn't gotten the address, she hadn't expected that, but he'd confirmed the firm. Daquan Industries. The ComApex invite list, which Brandon, through a contact who owed him something, had managed to get a blurred partial of at a networking event. Daisa's name. The firm name. Sam sat in her car outside the Daquan Industries building on a Thursday and watched the lobby. She watched for 40 minutes before she saw Daisa come through the revolving door with a briefing folder, walking with the specific cadence she'd always had. The one Sam had spent years trying to replicate and couldn't quite get right because the thing that made Daisa walk the way she walked wasn't a physical thing. It was internal. It was some specific kind of certainty that Daisa had always carried and Sam had always wanted to either absorb or dismantle. She was with him. Sam didn't know who he was yet, but she clocked his height, his bearing, the way he walked beside Daisa with an inch of professional space between them that was nevertheless charged in a way Sam could identify from 100 yards away. She'd always been good at reading the invisible architectures between people. It was, in its way, her only real skill. She took 3 photos on her phone. She drove home and looked up Daquan Industries and found DeAndre Daquan in 0.3 seconds. She looked at his photo for a long time. Then she opened her LinkedIn profile and began editing it. She found him at an industry event 2 weeks later. The kind that costs $300 to attend and that Sam had made Brandon pay for because she'd told him she was expanding her professional network. Brandon believed this because Brandon always believed what she told him and because she'd been particularly warm the night before. Sam wore the same color scheme as Daisa. She'd been doing this for so long it was unconscious, the deep wine, the cream, the specific palette she'd absorbed from watching her sister until it felt like her own. She introduced herself to a woman named Priya who worked in Daquan Industries' marketing division. She was charming. She was warm. She asked exactly the right questions and said exactly the right things, and by the end of the conversation Priya had taken her card and said they should absolutely get coffee. Sam smiled the smile. Step 1. Part 4, Trip to New York. Chapter 10, The Meeting, the Tension, the Almost. New York in November was impatient. Everything moved fast and meant something. The Daquan Industries pitch to a luxury fragrance house that wanted to remake its cultural presence had been Daisa's concept from the ground up. She'd spent 3 weeks building it, the consumer psychology research, the cultural positioning, the story architecture for the campaign. DeAndre had reviewed every draft. He'd revised 2 lines and left the rest entirely intact. He told her in the elevator on the way up to the pitch, "This one matters. It's the room. The room matters more than the idea sometimes." "Then we'll own the room," she'd said. And they had. The pitch lasted 90 minutes. Daisa presented the second half, the consumer insight section, the cultural narrative. The specific emotional architecture of why this brand's existing story was doing harm to the exact demographic it was trying to attract, and how to rebuild it without a rebrand. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. The room was very quiet when she finished. The brand director, a woman in her 50s who had the face of someone who'd approved and rejected hundreds of pitches and knew her own mind completely, looked at Daisa for a long moment and then said, "How long have you been doing this?" "Long enough," Daisa said. The woman smiled. "Yes, I can see that." They got the account. DeAndre was quiet on the way out. Not the preoccupied quiet she'd learned was him processing. This was something stiller. More direct. In the cab to the hotel he said, "You know I can't keep calling you my assistant forever. You can until you have a better title to offer." "I have one. I've been trying to figure out how to offer it without." He stopped. "Without what?" He looked at her directly. DeAndre Daquan looked at most things indirectly, from angles, professionally, the way a strategist looks at a problem from its perimeter rather than its center. When he looked at something straight on, it meant he'd decided something. "Without it being complicated," he said. Daisa held his look. "It already is," she said. The hotel room that night. Her room. He'd walked her to the door because the building had a security protocol that required key access and hers had jammed twice already, and the front desk had given them a backup in case. She got the door open. She turned. He was closer than professional distance. He touched her face. Just his hand along her jaw, his thumb at the line of her cheekbone, and she let herself breathe for a moment in a way she hadn't allowed herself since Chicago. She put her hand against his chest and felt his heartbeat doing something unsteady. He kissed her differently this time. Not brief. Not careful. Something that had been held back by 2 weeks of post-its and sidelong looks and deliberate professional space, and it came out in this specific, consuming way that made the door frame feel necessary because she needed something to stay upright against. His hands. Her hands. The architecture of wanting someone who is also your employer and your live-in landlord, and the man who just looked at a room full of industry people and said, "She's the reason we're here." All of it folded into the narrow space of a hotel doorway in Midtown Manhattan. She put her hand on his chest again. Not pushing. Just a pause. He stopped. Pulled back. Looked at her with his breathing not quite right. "I know," he said. Before she said anything. "I know. I'm not saying no," she said. Her voice was quiet. Steady, but barely. "I'm saying I need it to mean something. If we..." She stopped. Started again. "I can't do this, and then have it be a thing we navigate professionally. I can't do this casually. I don't work that way." He nodded slowly. He wasn't performing understanding, he was actually arriving at it, which was different. "What do you need?" he asked. She thought about it. "Time," she said. "And for you to be sure. Because I already am." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face went very still and then moved. "I'm getting there," he said. She went inside. The door closed between them. She leaned her back against it and let her head fall back and stared at the ceiling of the hotel room and let herself feel, in the privacy of the dark, everything she hadn't let herself feel in the doorway. Chapter 11. Back in Atlanta, Sam gets a key. Not a literal key. Not yet. But Priya had introduced her to Marcus, who worked in Daquan Industries' creative department, and Marcus, who was attractive and uncomplicated and who Sam had identified in their third conversation as someone who thought of himself as perceptive when he was in fact easily read, had become, over the course of 3 weeks, a man who answered Sam's calls. He told her things he thought were harmless. Office culture things. People dynamics. Who was rising, who was struggling, who the boss liked. "He's different lately," Marcus said one evening over drinks, his second. "Like, warmer. More present. We think it might be the new assistant." Sam set her glass down with precision. "His assistant?" "Daisa. She's different. She came in and in like 3 weeks she's running the culture of that floor. Like not officially but you can tell. And DeAndre." He shook his head with a faint grin. "He looks at her sometimes and I've worked for this man for 3 years and I've never seen him look at anyone like that." Sam smiled. "The chosen one." "She sounds impressive," Sam said. "She really is," Marcus said, and Sam could tell he meant it, and she noted that too, filed it, moved on. That night Sam went home and stood in front of her mirror for a long time. Same face as Daisa almost. Same bone structure. Their mother's eyes on both of them. Daisa had their father's mouth, a specific kind of generous. Sam had their grandmother's, precise. She looked at herself looking at herself and felt the hunger articulate itself, as it sometimes did in quiet rooms. Daisa had a man who looked at her like that. Daisa had a position she'd built herself. Daisa had a life somewhere in the city that Sam couldn't reach and couldn't map, and it was intolerable. Not painful. Intolerable. She began making a plan. Part 5, Trip 3, Miami. Chapter 12, Miami, What They Confess. Miami in December was warm in that specific way that feels like a contradiction, the sun on your shoulders while the rest of the country was buried in gray. The campaign shoot for the fragrance house they'd landed in New York was 2 days of location work in Wynwood, which meant 12-hour days in the heat and then evenings that were free in a way business trips rarely were. Daisa had the first full non-working evening since she'd started the job. She put on a sundress, the kind of choice you make only when nobody from your regular life can see you, and walked 2 blocks to a restaurant that a woman at the shoot location had told her was worth it. She was alone and she brought a book and she ordered the fish and a glass of something cold and amber. DeAndre found her at the table 40 minutes later. Not by looking for her, she believed that. He'd walked in to eat, had scanned the restaurant in the way he scanned rooms, and had registered her before his feet had finished deciding. She'd seen him come in. She'd had 3 seconds to decide whether to signal him or not, and she'd lifted her hand, and apparently that was that. He sat across from her. "You brought a book," he said. "I like books." "I know. I've seen your apartment." A beat. They both felt the shape of it, the fact of him having been in her apartment, which had happened once, legitimately. When a pipe under her sink had made a sound like a small catastrophe, and he'd come to look at it before calling the plumber because he'd happened to be walking by. He'd stood in the middle of her living room with a flashlight and looked at the bookshelves and said, in an almost private voice, that he'd read 3 of these. She'd made coffee. He'd stayed an hour. Neither of them had discussed that hour since. "Daisa, I know what you're going to say. Do you? You're going to say something that sounds professional and isn't." He smiled. Actually smiled, the full version, not the conference room approximation. In the warm light of this specific Miami restaurant with the windows open and the sound of something live playing somewhere down the street, DeAndre DeQuan smiled like a man who'd stopped managing himself for an evening. "I was going to say I keep thinking about what you said. In New York. That you were already sure." Daisa set her fork down. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't say it. I don't want you to." He leaned forward slightly. His hands on the table. "I want to tell you something and I want you to hear it as what it is, not as a thing I'm saying because I'm in a warm city and it's evening and you're wearing that dress." She looked at him. "I've been doing this work for 11 years, he said. "I've had good people around me. Smart people. People I trusted with my work. But I've never had someone who," he stopped. Chose words carefully, the way she'd noticed he did when something mattered. "Who makes the work feel bigger. Like it can be more than I was letting it be. And I don't think that's," he stopped again. "I don't think that's a professional feeling." Daisa was quiet for a moment. "What is it then?" she asked. Her voice was soft. He looked at her and said it plainly, "I think it might be you." The restaurant moved around them. The music somewhere down the street played something slow. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just that. His hand turned under hers and his fingers closed, and they sat like that in the middle of dinner with the windows open and the city warm outside. "Tell me something you've never told anyone about this work," she said quietly. A different kind of intimacy than a hotel doorway. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "My father thought advertising was dishonest work. He said you can't build something real out of making people want things they don't need. We argued about it for 10 years, and he died before I could show him what I was actually building. And I make every campaign for him. Every single one. I make it the way I wish I could have explained it to him, like it's not selling something, it's telling someone their life is worth being told." Daisa didn't speak for a moment. Then, "My sister has spent most of my life trying to be me. And I've spent most of my life trying to figure out whether that's love or something else. And I moved here, to this new apartment, partly to do this job and partly because I needed to not know where I was for a while. To be somewhere she couldn't find me. And the scary part," she looked down at their hands and back up at him, "is that this is the first place that's felt like mine. Not because of the apartment. Because of the work. Because of..." She stopped. "Because of," he said. She looked at him. "You know," she said. They walked back to the hotel along the water. He kept her close on the inside of the sidewalk without making a production of it. The city put its warm hand on everything. At her door they stood facing each other, and he looked at her for a long moment. "I'm sure," he said. "I wanted to tell you that. I'm sure." She let him in. The door closed behind them and the city outside kept going the way cities do, indifferent and constant, and inside the room they had their first night together, slow and honest and a little uncertain in the specific. Good way that means neither person was performing anything. She fell asleep with his hand at the small of her back and slept deeply, without her body bracing, for the first time in years. Chapter 13, Sam sleeps her way to the inside. Marcus had stopped being the objective and become the obstacle. He'd grown attached. Sam had known she'd built it that way, and now the attachment was making him cautious in ways that were inconvenient. He'd stopped sharing office details the way he used to, going quiet when she asked pointed questions, giving her a look once that she hadn't liked. She ended it on a Tuesday. Kindly. With the right amount of softness in her voice and the right amount of seeming reluctance. He looked hurt. She'd felt nothing about the look but understood its function. She was already 3 steps ahead. Priya's colleague, a man named Jared who handled account management at Daquan Industries. Jared had been at the industry event where Sam had first made contact with Priya. He'd spoken to Sam for 11 minutes, given her his card, and had apparently mentioned her once to Priya in passing. Sam had found his number on the card and held onto it for 5 weeks, letting it age. She called him on a Wednesday afternoon and was warm and remembered his details, the project he'd mentioned, the client difficulty he'd referenced, and made him feel seen in that particular way she had. Coffee became drinks. Drinks became dinner. He worked in account management. He had access to client lists, project timelines, travel schedules. She found out about Miami the way she found out about most things, patiently, by asking questions that sounded like other questions, while the person answering believed they were having a conversation about themselves. Jared mentioned the crew that had gone down for the shoot. He mentioned DeAndre was unusually unavailable during the trip, phone calls getting deferred, quick responses where he usually engaged fully. He laughed and said something about the boss being distracted. Sam laughed with him. She looked at her sister's Instagram that night, still public. Daisa hadn't locked it down. No posts from Miami. No location tags. But in the background of a story Daisa had posted earlier in the week, a brief video of her desk at the office, a candle she'd mentioned buying. Sam had paused the frame on the background. Books on a shelf she didn't recognize from Daisa's old apartment. A window at an angle that suggested a different light source. A reading chair she knew. The reading chair. The yellow one Daisa had loved for years. Sam stared at the frozen frame. Daisa was living somewhere with those books. With that chair. Buckhead adjacent, she thought, based on the office location and her sister's history of short commutes. She started pulling addresses. She started working her way toward the door. Part 6. Trip 4, Los Angeles. Chapter 14, Before They Left. The weeks between Miami and Los Angeles were the best weeks of Daisa Marks's adult life. She would understand this later, looking back, that this was the window. The clean, uninterrupted space of it. Before Sam got close enough. Before things broke in the ways they were about to break. What the weeks looked like, from the outside, professional. They were a boss and his senior assistant, which was what she'd asked to remain publicly until the title conversation was resolved and her work could stand entirely on its own before anyone inside the firm attached it to any personal story. DeAndre respected this. She was learning, a man who respected specific requests. What the weeks looked like from the inside, different. Post-its that had started including things that weren't about work, a line from a book she'd mentioned, a question about her coffee order that already knew the answer and was asking something else. Evenings in her apartment when the work was finished. Him cooking once, badly, and her sitting on the counter watching and offering no assistance because she was too busy laughing. The particular intimacy of two people learning each other's small habits, the way he went quiet when he was thinking deeply, the way she made tea when something was bothering her that she wasn't ready to say out loud, the way they could sit in the same room reading without it needing to be anything other than what it was. She had stopped checking her phone for Sam's number. Not completely. She checked once a day now instead of continuously. It was, for her, progress. Sam had not called in 8 days. Sam had not texted. This was not peace. Daisa knew it wasn't peace. It was the particular quiet that precedes something, the way weather goes still before it decides what it's going to do. But in the weeks before Los Angeles, Daisa let herself have it. She let herself be happy. Chapter 15, Los Angeles, The Confession and the Commitment. The LA trip was 3 days. New campaign presentation to a streaming platform with a content gap in the 25 to 40 Black professional demographic. Daisa's research, Daisa's insight architecture, Daisa's language, delivered now under both their names. DeAndre had handled the title conversation 2 weeks prior. She was now officially creative strategy director, reporting directly to him. The office had taken it the way she'd expected, surprise from some, zero surprise from others. Katura had walked into her office the morning of the announcement and set a coffee on her desk and said, "Took long enough," and left. In Los Angeles, the presentations went the way things go when the work is right and the people presenting it believe in it completely. By the second day they had what they'd come for. The third day was loose. No meetings scheduled. A final dinner, casual. They ate on a terrace in Silver Lake with the city below them going on in all directions, the specific immensity of LA at night, the lights stretching so far they forgot they were lights and became something ambient, something that felt like being inside a living thing. He'd brought a bottle of something she'd once said she liked. She'd told him once, 3 months ago, and he'd held it. She thought about that. About the specific act of a person holding something you said. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah. What happens when we go back?" "Not professionally, I know what happens professionally." "I mean," she gestured at the space between them at the table. "This." DeAndre looked at her with that direct look he'd earned the right to buy now. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. "I want you to answer first." He was quiet for a moment, honest in it. "I want you to stay," he said. Not because of the clause. Not because it's convenient. I want you in my house because I want you in my life. Not the professional version, though I want that too. He shook his head slightly, like he was working against some internal resistance to plainness. I want the evenings. The books. The terrible cooking. I want the specific way you tell me when I'm wrong about something without making me feel small for being wrong. He looked at her. I want you, Daisa. Clearly. Completely. However long it takes you to believe that. She looked at this man who had, in 4 months, become something she hadn't expected or planned for or protected herself against, and she felt the thing she'd been careful about naming, because once you name things they become true in a different way. I love you, she said. It arrived without fuss. Clean and clear and certain. Something crossed his face, not surprise, but the landing of something expected and nevertheless stunning when it touched down. I love you, he said back. Quiet. Direct. Like he'd known and was glad to finally stop knowing it alone. She reached across the table. He met her halfway. Below them LA went on, indifferent and immense and beautiful. They called her parents from the terrace, because Daisa had been thinking about them, about what she owed them, and what she owed herself, and what it meant to bring people she loved into the thing she was building. Her mother answered on the second ring. Daisa, baby. Mom. I'm well. I'm in Los Angeles for work. I have something I want to tell you and Dad both. A pause. And I want you both to come to Atlanta. To my office. Next Friday. There's an event. My firm is celebrating a campaign launch. I want you there. Her mother was crying a little by the end, the good kind. Her father said, in his specific, quiet way, that they would be there. She didn't mention Sam. She knew she didn't need to. Sam, wherever Sam was, would find out. Sam always found out. What Sam would find at the end of that finding, that was the part Daisa had decided to stop trying to manage. Some things you couldn't prepare for. You just had to stand there when they arrived and be exactly what you were. Part 7. The Unraveling. Chapter 16. What Sam Found. She found the address on a Wednesday, 3 days before the event. Not through any one of the men she'd worked her way through, none of them had gotten that close. She found it through a property record search cross-referenced with the name Daquan that a paralegal friend had helped her run as a favor, framed as a tenant's dispute research. She drove to the property on a Wednesday evening. She sat outside in her car for 40 minutes. The house was large and beautiful and private, set back from the street with a garden and a side gate. Through the garden gate, she could see the window of the lower apartment. Light behind it. Warm and amber and settled, the kind of light a room makes when it's been inhabited by someone who belongs there. Daisa's car was in the drive. DeAndre Daquan's car was also in the drive. Sam sat very still. She had known, abstractly, from Marcus's early revelations, from the patterns in Daisa's behavior, from the things Jared had said without knowing what he was saying, that something was happening between her sister and her employer. She had known it, and she had processed it as information, and had continued making her plans the way you continue building towards something when you have no intention of being stopped. But seeing the cars together in the drive of the house where Daisa lived, where Daisa was right now, in that warm amber light, something in Sam shifted. Not broke. Broke implies something structural giving way. This was more like a door opening that had been locked for a long time, and behind it was not a room but a void, and the void was screaming. She picked up her phone. She called their mother. You need to know something, Sam said. Her voice was perfectly steady. About Daisa and her employer. Chapter 17. The day before. Daisa's mother called on Thursday morning. The first thing she said was, Sam says you're living with your boss. Daisa set down her coffee cup. She'd been in the middle of reviewing the event materials for the Friday launch. The office was already in motion, Katura directing catering logistics, the creative team finalizing the exhibit display of the campaign work, flowers arriving in the lobby that Daisa had personally selected because she knew what the space needed. She walked to her office and closed the door. It's a residential arrangement that was part of my employment contract, Daisa said. I've told you this. I live in an apartment on the property. Sam says it's more than that. Sam says a lot of things. Are you coming tomorrow? A pause. Your father and I are both coming. But Daisa, if what Sam is saying is true. What is Sam saying specifically? Another pause, longer. She says you've been manipulated. That this man saw an opportunity with someone younger, and he took advantage. Mom. She's worried about you. Mom. Her voice was quiet and very clear. I need you to hear me. Not Sam. Me. I am 26 years old. I built a career in 4 months that most people spend 10 years working toward. I am happy. I am safe. I am in love, and it is the kind of love I chose fully with my whole mind, and there is nothing manipulative or compromised about it. I need you to decide whether you are coming tomorrow to celebrate your daughter or to investigate her. Silence. Then, softly, we're coming to celebrate you, baby. Then I'll see you at 6. She hung up and stayed very still in her office for a moment. Then she texted DeAndre, My sister knows where we live. He replied in 40 seconds. Are you okay? She held the phone. Then, I will be. Tomorrow might be complicated. His reply, I'll be there for all of it. She set the phone down and went back to the event materials and worked until everything was exactly what it needed to be. Chapter 18, Friday. The event. The arrival. The launch event for the streaming campaign was on the 38th floor of the Daquan Industries building, the same floor where Daisa had first walked in 4 months ago with 3 prepared questions and a cream blazer and the specific determination of someone who had decided to build something real. The space had been transformed. The campaign work was displayed across illuminated panels, the photography, the copy, the cultural storytelling. Each panel carried 2 names, DeAndre Daquan and Daisa Marks. Her name was there in the same size as his. She'd noticed it when the panels went up that morning and had stood in front of them for a moment and felt the specific weight of being seen in work you'd actually done. Her parents arrived at 6:15. Her father, a man of measured words and deep attention, walked in and looked at the panels and looked at his daughter and said, there she is, in the voice he saved for moments that mattered. Her mother held her face in both hands and said nothing for a long time, which said everything. DeAndre met them at 8. He was easy with them in a way that Daisa had half expected and still felt something about, the way he shook her father's hand, and the way her father held the grip a beat longer than required, measuring something, and apparently found what he was looking for. The room was full. Industry people, clients, the streaming platform's team, press. Music low and specific. The campaign video looping on the main screen. Daisa was in the middle of a conversation with the brand director from New York, the woman who had asked how long she'd been doing this, when she saw Sam. Sam was at the entrance. She was wearing the wine and cream color scheme. Of course she was. Daisa finished her sentence. Excused herself calmly. Walked toward the entrance. Chapter 19, The Unraveling, out loud. Sam's face, when Daisa reached her, was doing something complicated. The performance was still running the smile, the composure, the particular arrangement of warmth that Sam had always been able to produce on demand. But underneath it something was coming apart, and Daisa could see it because she had been watching that face her entire life and knew every version of it, including the one it made when the hunger got too close to the surface. You weren't invited, Daisa said. Quietly. Not a scene. Just truth. I know. Sam looked around the room. Her eyes moved to the panels, to her sister's name, to the photographs. To DeAndre across the room, standing with their parents, their father still talking, their mother laughing at something. She looked at all of it the way someone looks at something they want and also want to destroy. It's beautiful, Sam said. Sam. It should have been mine. Still quiet. Still smiling. That was the thing about Sam. She could say the most alarming things in the most even voice. All of this. This job. This, her eyes moved to DeAndre. This man. You never see what you have, Daisa. You never. Stop. Appreciate any of it. You move through your life taking up space that I could have used so much better. Sam. Firm, now. Sam turned to her fully. Something behind the performance was fully visible now. The carefully maintained composure had a fracture line running through it and Daisa could see where it went. Do you know how long I've followed you? Sam said. Her voice stayed level. That was almost the worst part. Do you have any idea how much work it takes? To be next to you all the time while you just a small, terrible laugh, while you just live your life like it's yours. It is mine, Sam. I know how to do everything you do. I learned it. I studied it. I know your cadence and your taste and your— She stopped. Started again. I slept with Brandon. I slept with half the people in your circles just to stay in them. And then you moved and cut me out and found this. She gestured at the room, and I was supposed to just. You need help. Daisa said it plainly. Not cruelty. Just the truth that had been true for years, and that she'd been too careful to say directly. You have needed it for a long time, and everyone who loves you has looked away from it, because looking at it is too hard. I am done looking away. Sam's composure broke. Not dramatically, not a collapse, not screaming. Just the face going wrong. The smile falling off. Something real coming through that had never been let out in public, had always been managed and redirected and performed over, and here in the middle of her sister's office on her sister's best night it was simply no longer containable. I wanted your life, Sam said. Just that. Stripped clean. I know, Daisa said. I know you did. Their mother had arrived behind Daisa. Daisa knew it from the shift in the air. She didn't turn. Sam. There. Mother's voice. Sam looked at their mother and something moved through her. The childhood of it, the weight of being seen, finally seen, by the parent who had always softened the edges of everything Sam did and called it love. Mom, Sam said, and her voice cracked on it. Baby. Their mother stepped forward. She has everything, Sam said. She always has everything. Samantha. Their father's voice. He had come to stand beside their mother. His voice was the kind of quiet that took up all the space in a room. That's enough. Sam looked at her father. Their father looked at Sam the way he had never quite looked at her before, not the softened look, the protected look, the look that had always cost Daisa something. This was a clear look. An honest one. "I think you've known for a long time what this has been," he said. "I think we have too. And I think we owe your sister an honest conversation about what we've let happen in this family. But tonight," he looked at Daisa. "Tonight is not about what we missed. Tonight is about what she built." Sam was crying now. The performance completely down. Daisa looked at her sister. Her beautiful, hungry, lost sister. And she felt the complicated thing she'd always felt, the love underneath everything, the grief of it, the exhaustion, the clarity. "I'm not abandoning you," Daisa said. "I'm not. But I cannot be your life, Sam. I cannot be the thing you replace yourself with. And until you get help, real help, I need you to give me space." Sam looked at her. Then Sam nodded. Just once. Small. She left the way she came in. Their mother went with her. Their father stayed. He turned to his eldest daughter and held out his arms, and Daisa walked into them and let herself be held, briefly, by the man who had named her, in the middle of her own beautiful room. Chapter 20. What Remains. DeAndre found her on the terrace at the edge of the party, looking out over the city. He stood beside her without a word for a moment. That was one of the things she had come to love about him, his knowledge of when silence was the more accurate language. She told him what had been said. Most of it. The parts that were hers to tell. He listened the way he listened to the things that mattered fully, without looking for his next response. "She's sick," Daisa said. "She's been sick for a long time. And my parents loved her in a way that made it worse, and they know that now. My dad knows. He's known for longer than tonight." "What do you need?" he asked. She thought about it. "I need to go home," she said. "I need to be in my apartment with my books and my reading chair. I need to be in the place that's mine and let this be over for tonight." He nodded. They said goodbye to her father together, the three of them standing briefly in a circle in the middle of the room her name was printed in, and her father shook DeAndre's hand again and looked at Daisa and said, "Proud." Just that one word. It landed in her chest and stayed. In the car she leaned her head against the window and watched Atlanta move past. He put his hand over hers on the console. She turned her hand and held it. At the property, he walked her to her door, the garden entrance, the private one, the door that was hers. She put her key in and turned it. "Come in," she said. He came in. They sat in her apartment in the warm light, with the books on the shelves and the reading chair in its corner, and didn't speak for a long time. He made tea, badly, and she corrected him, and they sat on the couch with it, and the city was quiet outside, and the thing between them was clean and certain and wholly chosen by both of them. "I want you to know something," he said. "Tell me. Whatever happens next, with your sister, with your family, with work, I'm not going anywhere. I'm saying this plainly because I know that matters to you." The plainness. Daisa looked at him. She thought about plainness. About the people in her life who had said things in one direction while meaning another, who had dressed love in other clothing and called it care, who had needed her for their own architecture and called it family. She thought about what it meant to be loved by someone who was not using you to complete themselves. "I know you're not," she said. "That's the first thing I was sure of." He kissed her in the quiet of her apartment. She kissed him back. Outside, the city did what cities do. She was home. Not the address. Not the walls. The feeling, the specific, hard one, finally arrived feeling of being exactly where you chose to be. Daisa Marks was 26 years old. She had a life that was entirely, completely, and at last hers. Hood Eloquence, where the streets meet the literature. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The end.